me at the Musial with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good morning. Welcome into another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host, Daniel Shop at C70. With me as always, Alan Medlock, a Medlock1 on the Twitters, coming to you Friday morning after the Cardinals got a chance to play in a pretty special game last night at Rickwood Field, honoring the Negro Leagues. And, you know, Alan, you and I were talking beforehand. I didn't get a chance to watch it for various reasons. Kind of try to keep up online and see what people were saying, some of the clips and highlights. But it sounds like it was a really good game that neither one of us can really do full justice to.
No, completely. Yeah, that's exactly how I feel about it. It was like we talked about. I love the pageantry of these. I love the what the baseball reaches out to do stuff like this. I'm a ballpark guy myself. You know, to see that it moved to Birmingham and to one that means so much to so many people. The Willie Mays tie-in was, I mean, it's crazy how it all worked out. But yeah, good ball game. Great setting for it. A lot of history, a lot of emotion. It was fun to watch, and you know, sometimes it's kind of funny how the Alabama guy will have a big game at a ballpark like that. You know, what I mean,
Yeah.
it's that's the thing about baseball. Sometimes it just finds a way, and it was cool to see.
Yeah, there was a lot of amazing moments in that. Yeah, with Brendan Donovan really excited about playing in a place in Alabama. And Mason Wynn, having that connection, he, had a good game as well. But the stories that you hear, John Denton was right. No, he's got one up on the official site. I'm sure there's other places, but talking about Mason Wynn and his stepfather and how when he was a kid, they had Negro League players' names on their back of their jerseys, and they had to write reports about these guys. So they knew, Mason Wynn knew about these. This wasn't just a oh, hey, let me learn about this the week before type of thing. This was something that he'd grown up with. And so to be playing on that field, I think in any situation, but especially in this kind of context, would have been, and he said he was just really emotional. And so it's really cool that those kind of guys got a chance to play in that kind of thing.
Yeah, uh, it's cool. You know, you make it to the bigs and whatnot. And it was funny. I was surprised when Donovan came out and said that he had never played there before in the post game, which surprised me. You know, being he's a very well known travel ball in USA baseball player that he had never seen it. And I was like, I know there's tournaments that run through there all the time, so I was surprised that it didn't work out. But make the most of it. Said he had a lot of family there, and I just think that stuff's cool. And the symbolism of how it works. I mean, that's what makes baseball the best.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's the deep history that baseball has is a lot of this, right? And I mean, it's not necessarily always a pretty history, given the fact that the Negro Leagues had to be a separate thing for so long. But it's great that baseball is really kind of celebrating that part of baseball, not Major League Baseball. I mean, because you don't want to celebrate the history of Major League Baseball in regard to that, but the history of the Negro Leagues and just baseball in general is really cool. And it's good that I think it's going to be very interesting. You and I were, we were talking about beforehand that the ceremonial games, as you called them, the game at Cooperstown or at where's the Little League World Series at? I've drawn a blank right now. Anyway, that game,
Williamsport.
um, Williamsport. Yes, thank you. I knew I was going to come up with it at some point in time. The Williamsport game. They've played games in the past. It's been a long time at Doubleday Field at Cooperstown. The Field of Dreams game that they had in Iowa, this game, and I'm sure they'll be continuing to try to come up with more games like this. But these games are fun. and I like them, and I think they should continue them. I think it's also going to be good if they rotate them somewhat, you know? I mean, you go back to Rickwood next year maybe, but then, then you find something else because I think that the impact of the first one is great, right? I mean, we knew that we saw that with Field of Dreams game. The first one was really cool, really awesome, and then the second one was, hey, nice. I mean, granted, it's oh no, I guess pandemic. It was after pandemic, right? Because it was supposed to be the first one was supposed to be pandemic year, but still, it was that you went next year and it was cool, but you'd kind of done a lot of the stuff you were going to do with the first one, and so and then you run the risk of it just being just a game. So I do think if they can find 5, 6, 7 of these and rotate them, do them in like 2-year spans, and so you're not playing there every year. It makes it more special.
Yeah, no, I agreed. I like that idea to where you can rotate it around and make it a big deal, and honestly, kind of London sounds like it's going to be a yearly deal, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, for choice of a better term, it feels like it's a world away. You know what I mean? Just kind of weird to do that.
Yeah,
But anything
yeah.
in the states of a driving distance type situation, I do wish they would rotate them a little bit and play one every year. Just makes a lot of sense, and I don't know. I mean, that's the progressive side of baseball that I enjoy right now. I mean, now of course everybody, and maybe this is the right way to look at it, is going to be the you know capitalize on the money side, but
Mhm.
I just like the outreach to areas that we're trying to get to drive a fan base and drive player interest.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's really interesting. You put these games in one pot, and then you put the world games in another one, right? The London series, the going to play in Japan, going to play. At some point in time, they've been talking about playing in Puerto Rico for a while, right? Because they were talking about that
Yeah,
even when and then we thought, oh, maybe Yachty can go play before he retires, and that still hasn't come to play. I played in Dominican, I think, before that the game a long time ago in Cuba. That's probably not going to happen anytime soon. But that kind of thing is different than these kind of games, but it's still cool to be able to have that difference, right? And I think that's what we kind of need a little bit in baseball, right? As fans, we're watching this team 162 games a year and 81 of them at home, and you get into that rhythm. So anything that kind of breaks it up as a novelty is pretty fun usually. I can't, every once in a while it just goes blank, and I'm sure there's people that are complaining about the Cardinals losing a home date or the fact that there's an off Friday off day or something like that. But for the most part, I think it's really cool, and it's really interesting that baseball has finally opened up a little bit into doing some of these kind of things.
yeah. The um All well said. I mean, I completely agree. And it's while you were talking about that, I was trying to think of some of the other historic parks that they could probably try. And I'm sure there's some out there.
Yeah,
Rickwood
yeah.
is widely known. Of course, Field of Dreams is Field of Dreams, and Williamsport. But it would be cool. It'd be cool to kind of branch out and see what other areas you can do. And I was trying to think maybe something on the West Coast, but nothing stands out. But and I'm sure there's some that just slip in my mind. But yeah, just to keep pushing the envelope a little bit and broadcasting the game more than anything.
Yeah, I was, yeah, I had to look it up. I felt like the Cardinals had played out in Hawaii once. They did in 1997. They played the Padres out there. Um, and that's the kind of thing that kind of probably goes more, even though Hawaii's part of the states, it still probably goes more into that, world type of thing because
Yeah.
there's nothing. But yeah, I mean, maybe I mean, what do you play one in Omaha, for the call, to acknowledge college baseball? Um, did they do that? They haven't done that, have they?
No, but
Um,
I would assume with Omaha being high level that big league teams come through there though. You
yeah,
know
I
what I mean?
mean, yeah,
For the promo stuff. But I would love that. I mean, that would be amazing.
yeah. I mean, you could. I mean, yeah. It may be a little bit different just because college baseball has become almost as you
Yes.
were talking about at Blogger Day with your question to Mo, has almost become part of Major League Baseball, the development side of things. But playing a game, where the College World Series was played, it would be an option, I would think. I don't know if it would have the same, it obviously wouldn't have the same impact as a Rickwood Field or even a Field of Dreams game, but it would still be kind of an interesting place and give people a chance that maybe don't follow college baseball to see that. Now, granted, they've just, maybe this would have made more sense before they moved stadiums over there in Omaha, but
Yeah,
yeah,
very
I
true.
mean,
That was my first thought, honestly, to play at old Rosenblatt. But yeah, that did still be amazing.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I'm sure there are other stadiums around the play that, some older stadiums or something of that nature. Um, but and I know they're looking for it. I know that occasionally get those fan surveys, and I think after the Field of Dreams came out, they were kind of they had one of the questions was where else would you like to see games being played or something like that. So yeah, I think um they'll be creative with it. They'll look at other teams. I mean, what the NBA's played them on aircraft carriers or stuff
Oh
like
yeah,
that. So, you can find unique ways to market your game, and people get excited about that. You're right. I mean, that was a Thursday night game that everybody in baseball was watching, and probably a lot of casual fans because it's on Fox, and people that may have just turned it on and got interested in the history or heard about it, and so you got people that weren't normally watching the game watching it, and that's kind of what baseball wants as well.
absolutely. Yeah, that's uh, big Fox, big deal out of it. I mean, it had I
Mhm.
wouldn't say Super Bowl pregame, but I mean, it has substantial pregame, and they did it justice. I mean, as far as I can tell, that like I said before the game, this means a lot. This means I hope this comes out the right way. This means a lot to people and a lot more than I probably understand how much it means. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I hope that makes sense at all. And I thought they did a great job of that.
Well, sure. I mean, our background is significantly different from the people
Sure.
that were tied to that, and so as cool and as nice and meaningful as we think it is, it's 10 times more so to them. So, yeah, as I said at the front, we're not the two people you need to be listening to really get the impact of this. But it was still even to us was pretty neat. And also, what was I mean, it's got to be one of the most amazing things for a person. Adam Kloffenstein gets to make his major league debut there,
Yeah.
right? Major league debut, no matter where you are or what happens, is going to be the one of the highlights of your life if you're a ball player. But to make it in that kind of game on that kind of field has to be, overwhelming a bit.
Yeah. I mean, to come out and do what he did is even more impressive. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And
yeah,
but yeah, it's I thought about that last night. I was like, man, what a story you get to write. With the way that you break in and all those things. It was impressive, and it's one of those that I just wonder how hard it would be just to compete, in that
mhm,
situation. So it was awesome. Yeah, I mean, what a I that's baseball has a way of just of falling into these kind of situations, if that makes sense, to
yeah,
where that's a story he'll be telling the rest of his life.
yeah. Well, as we've often been reminded, baseball is the best. So,
Yep.
um, and let's talk. Maybe we'll use this transition into talking a little bit more about the Cardinals then. But Kloffenstein getting called up was a little bit. I don't know, it was a little bit of a surprise. Not that he didn't deserve it, and not that there was anybody necessarily ahead of him, but I just didn't necessarily see that coming. I had not been paying attention as much, and he's obviously had a good run down in Memphis. But um, were you a little bit surprised not only that they called him up, but then how at least they seem to be using him?
You know what? Honestly, I had not really thought about it too much. I mean, you knew there was a corresponding move coming,
Right.
but I didn't necessarily put too much thought into what it was. But yeah, I mean, now that you say that, you're just like, well, come up, you're throwing quick, type of situation.
Yeah.
So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that a lot of us, or at least had some idea that he was gonna be that 5th starter, right? And there was
Hmm.
some idea that maybe he would start that game, but then, when you look at it and he would've been on short rest and, so that didn't make sense, and Palante was set to go there, and it turned out for the most part okay. But so maybe they were just getting him into a game and we'll see him, but I feels like that they've got him up to cover some ground, right? I mean, that he's gonna be a guy that they're gonna go to for 2 or 3 innings for the most part, um, because it would be a waste otherwise, right? I mean, he's been on a starter routine. He'll whenever he goes back to Memphis, and at some point in time, I mean, it's a good chance just because 'cause he's got options and stuff like that, he will. He'll go back probably as a starter. So, I mean, I don't think that last night's, 1, 2, 3 is going to be indicative of how they plan to use him. That being
Sure.
said, I guess it just depends on game situations and stuff like that. But having a guy up, and I think we saw that how important it was after the Marlins series, having maybe another guy besides Liberatore that can cover innings,
Sure.
is a big deal.
Yes, that's a great point. Yeah, that I love the story about he found out early before he was throwing. He said they pulled him back from the anthem to
Hmm.
get loose,
Yeah,
and I was like, man, that's it would be tough to it would definitely be tough to find your rhythm at that point, which he did after the first and did better than giving up the two bombs or whatnot. But
right.
yeah, that's agreed. I mean, it's one of those that if they're I as much as I hate to say this, if there's going to be if there's one thing, well, there's several things that are troublesome to look at right now, but the lack of Lynn innings is one of
Hmm.
those, which I do think will get better. But they're going to have to get some guys that can go multiple in different situations, and that makes it make a little more sense to bring him up to do that because they're gonna have to cover some serious innings, and they're going to rely on their bullpen a lot. Um, so yeah, that makes it sound like he may stay for a little while, which I did not think was going to be the case, honestly, when it was originally announced that he was coming.
Yeah. Yeah. I expect you probably will for a bit. Yeah. The Lynn thing has been. It was fascinating. Ben Humphreys put up a tweet today and showing, or yesterday, or I guess a couple of days ago, whenever it was, showing that from a FIP or an XFIP or XERA point of view, Lynn and Gibson are actually pitching fairly similarly.
Sure.
It's the ERA is significantly different, and I can't imagine what Lynn's ERA would be if he didn't have like a huge number of unearned runs. I mean, his unearned runs are
Oh,
ridiculous.
I meant to bring that up last week, but go ahead.
Well, yeah. I'll try to remember, put a pin on that one. We'll come back to it.
Yeah.
But even if you want to look at the and then say the quality isn't as bad as it could be, or he's just getting some bad luck, or whatever the case may be, I don't know. They've been bad, and he's not given very many of them, right? I mean, even the games that he has pitched fairly well, he's still hitting 100 pitches in 5 innings, right? He's just between walks and everything else, he's just not being efficient. I mean, we saw him stretched out to past the 5th inning in that Marlins game just because there was half the bullpen wasn't available, right? And even then, he still only got 1 out before having to be pulled. Um, yeah, you're right. I think that's gonna be a huge deal that they're gonna have to either either fix or be prepared for. And I don't know. I mean, is it I don't know if it's gonna be a situation where they can, if somebody like Kloffenstein was able to impress or whatever the case may be. I think we've seen enough that Liberatore needs to stay out of the rotation,
Yeah.
but if Kloffenstein or somebody else could impress, would they, consider moving Lynn to the bullpen? I doubt it.
Yeah. I
Um,
would think that's darn near impossible.
yeah, but, it's also difficult to have a starting pitcher that's gonna go out there and at best give you 5 innings, right? I mean, that's seen for a guy that you expected to be going, you know, 6 on the regular and 7 most of the time.
Yeah, it's one of those that I mean I'm a huge Lynn fan anyway, but I would be willing to bet that that kind of lightens up a little bit. That I bet that you know what I mean. It's going to be pitch efficiency at this point, and he's a strikeout guy. He's going to run into pitch count issues anyway. He always has his whole career. I think it's going to stabilize a little bit because I do think the defense has kind of kicked him around a little bit. I know for a fact it did that night we were there.
Well, yeah, and that night though, they all the runs were earned.
Well, maybe it wasn't then.
That
Maybe I'm
was
lying.
weird.
Maybe I'll shut
Honestly,
up and
no,
you. Yeah.
no, you're
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
because I agree. I thought when I was looking at that up a couple days ago, just trying to give an idea of his unearned runs, I was surprised because I thought all 4 of those runs that he gave up were probably one of them, and they weren't. But yeah, you're right.
But
The
you
day
know what?
before,
I don't.
it has
Here's
to
the thing.
happen.
That was
Yeah,
also the Little League Grand Slam where
right.
Arenado. That was, you know what I mean. And it's one of those. I'm
Yeah,
just like, I don't know if I want to argue with the scoring on that, but I get it. I mean, I get where
yeah,
it comes from.
yeah.
The a misplayed ball and a pick not made. That's tough to
Mhm.
kind of justify. But yeah, I mean, I feel like now and this may be the fanboy in me, but I bet that kind of subsides a little bit. I mean, I trust the veteran pitchers. Let's put it that way. And a lot of times they'll be able to figure their way out of some of these problems. Seriously.
Alan, you there?
Yeah, sorry. I was gonna say, did it really go out?
Okay. Somehow we've lost Alan. I'm gonna. I don't know what happened. Um, it is interesting, Lynn,
Daniel, you there?
as he's talking about if it's going to get better, especially on the defensive side of things, and it might. But it's been, let's see, he gave up 3 unearned runs in April. He gave up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, there you are. Um, yeah, I
Okay,
lost
you
you
there now?
somewhere in the middle of that.
God dang
So,
it.
and may have lost him again. Yeah, this is Friday morning, guys. Apparently the computers aren't awake either. But we'll see if we can get Alan back. If not, we'll stop and try again. But anyway, Lynn's allowed 5 unearned runs in June as well. Oh, 4 of those came in the Philadelphia game. So it's really weird. That I did some looking. I think like Michaelis hasn't given up an unearned run this year. Gibson and Sonny Gray have given up 1 or 2. So it's like they're like 90% earned, and then Lynn is more in the 75-80% range of unearned balls to total or unearned runs to total runs. So it's really weird that it's him and how he's doing that. And it's so concentrated behind him. Now, granted, some of that there have been times where he's made the errors, right? I mean, that he's done some of the work, but um, it's still a little bit weird that it's been so focused on one person. I'm going to assume that we're going to need to do some work here, so we're going to take a break, and I'm going to get Alan back.
Alisea, the second for 1, the double play. What a double play by Ozzie Smith. Oh, mercy.
All right, we're back. Zencaster apparently did not want to listen to us talk anymore, so it said we're going to cut Alan's mic. That made no sense, but we've got it fixed now, I think. And Alan, again, we were talking about Lance Lynn and some of the issues we've had with him. I think some of your argument got cut off, so if you want to restate any of that.
No, not even necessarily argument. It was one of those that's just I feel like the veteran pitchers, I trust them, and they'll find a way. I think they'll find a way to be productive and get back to maybe some career norms. It's one of those. He is what he is. It's always been the same thing. And he's keeping the ball in the ballpark a little bit more now than he did last year, and getting hurt by other things. So I bet he finds a way to get some outs and stays a little bit longer in games.
And hopefully so. I mean, you're right. There is a guy that knows what he's doing, and has history of it. It just is a little bit weird that he had 7 innings against Oakland in April, and then he had the back-to-back 6 inning games. One against Baltimore, once against the Reds that ended May, and you kind of felt like that was where you're getting at, right? That he'd kind of started to make that correction and started to make the steps that you would expect a veteran pitcher to make, and then the next 3 games after that, well, even 4 if you count the Miami series, have just not been not been long games and not necessarily been great games. And some of it is there's been a couple games probably he's been pulled early. Um, and there's been a little bit of, like I said, his own defense has kind of burned him at sometimes. But um, I don't know. Is there any concern because of how last year went for him that it's just not there anymore for Lance Lynn?
Um, I wouldn't say concern. I mean,
Mhm.
it, no,
Yeah.
not necessarily. I mean,
Okay.
it's one of those that's. I mean, he is what he is,
Sure.
and
Sure.
it's one of those things to. I, I'm not overly concerned with what we've seen so far. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Yeah.
Frustrating, yes, but I think that he'll right the ship.
And I mean, that's absolutely reasonable to think too. And then I think that if the Cardinals had Kloffenstein as a real option and somebody like Tinkins knocking on the door, if you had 2 or 3 guys that you really felt like they needed to be in the rotation, then the problems with Lynn would be more magnified, right? I
Yeah,
mean, that you'd be like, "Man, I don't know if we can keep running this guy out there when we've got XYZ coming up." But the Cardinals don't really have that, right? I mean, that's part of the problem is they don't have guys that are just clamoring to get in, because if they did, they wouldn't have this fifth starter problem, at least. So that hasn't been a case, and so yeah, I think they're going to give him plenty of room to try to work this out, um, and hopefully he does, because this is looked at the standings today and realized that by record the Cardinals are the fifth best team in the National League. I mean, they have a 500 record, and they're the fifth best team in the National League. I mean, it's hard to imagine given how we've seen this team play, right? I mean, this week losing 2 of 3 to the Marlins after splitting with the Rockies just recently. Um, they've struggled with the White Sox earlier in the year. We've seen them play to the level of their competition and lose. Um, we've also seen them sweep Baltimore. I mean, they've had their moments as well, and they're a 500 team, but it doesn't feel like this is a team that should be, you know, a playoff team, right? I mean, but it is given the way the rest of the National League is.
sure. No, I completely agree. It's yeah, there's definitely some frustrations and a lack of trust.
Mhm.
Because you know, in all that you just talked about, I feel like the series win in Wrigley was the biggest of all of them.
Fair, yeah,
And you come out and you feel build some momentum, and then you lose 2 or 3 in Miami. The troubling the troubling aspect for me is all the 1-run games.
mhm,
Now, keep in mind that could do 2, possibly 3 things. One, you can be battle tested and be really good when it's all said and done. Um, I'm not so certain I'm there yet because the walks are going to kill you
right,
late in the
right,
game, and that's what's become kind of troublesome to me. Um, Bottom line, way I've felt like this for the past month, if your stars aren't stars, you're never going to get out of this.
yeah,
That's what's going to have to happen. Burleson's been great this year. Win great this year. Donovan coming on, but until your first and third base spot aren't the guys that we think they're going to be, they're probably going to be in this kind of middling area.
mhm,
Now, the good part of that, they're not going to be out of this in a month. So,
mm,
what improvements are they willing to make? Mo this week said health's going to dictate what they do at the deadline, and some of the guys are coming back quickly. But it's just to me where I feel like they're good and they could sneak their way in. I'm not going to be convinced that they're a really good team until one of those two really start hitting.
yeah.
And yeah, and that's to me is what the biggest issue is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this team was built around those 2 guys, and if they're not doing it, then you've got problems. Well, and somewhat Contreras, and obviously, hopefully Contreras is back early in part of next week. But even then, how long does it take him to really get back to the form that we were seeing early on?
Yeah,
Um, but but yeah, I agree. I mean, you've got to have, and those guys have had good games, and games where it looks like things are coming around, and then you know they slump off. We'll have to see. Nolan got hit by the pitch and he wasn't available last night. I'm sure he's not going on the injured list. He should be back for Saturday, but he was starting to hit a little bit. Does this derail that? I don't know, but you're right. You're right. People are talking about, this team shouldn't be a buyer at the deadline, and I think the key here is they're not going to push all their chips in and try to win this year. I mean, that's not the kind of buying they're going to do. They're going to do the J.A. Happ, John Lester type of thing, where they
Sure.
send off a double A guy that maybe you've never heard of to get some sort of veteran guy that's going to stabilize things a little bit. They're not putting a whole lot into this, but they don't have to. I mean, that's the thing right now, right? I mean, if they can finish this season with 82 wins, they probably make the playoffs the way the things are going right now.
Yeah. No, I agreed. And like we talked about last week, I think it may only take incremental improvement to make a run at the division. And that's standing where they are right now. If someone comes back and gets hot, then they could be in a really good spot. So yeah, that's the one thing that unless things completely fall apart, and I just don't see it, just because we talked about last week, you have the guys in the rotation to stop that from happening now. They're going to be in it at the end of July, and that's they're going to test their metal a little bit, and see how much movement they're willing to make, and that could be a big test on a front office that's clearly in transition.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, and I don't. We don't know what's out there, right? I mean, the National League. If you're looking at teams that are out of it to be sellers, you're looking at Colorado and Miami, right?
Exactly.
I mean, those are the only two teams that aren't probably at least standing pat, right? I mean, there may be front offices like Pittsburgh that don't necessarily want to go at it, although they probably should, given where they're at. But they're not selling because they're right in this. And the American League's not much better. So you're only the pool of players is going to be small unless some teams try to do some sort of buy and sell type of thing. And so, if that's the case, I mean, one, there's not a lot you can do, but two, those players are going to be a lot more costly than they should be, right? I mean,
Yeah.
A Jose Quintana type, although the Mets have gotten back in it, would cost you more than what it cost a couple years ago. So I know it is very difficult. And it's, I don't know. I think it's going to be very interesting to see if the Cardinals are able to pull off any moves or what they do, because I think some people would be upset and frustrated if Mo came to the deadline and said, well, we tried, but there were just, the prices were too high because of, everybody was still, and there were very few sellers. And that would be frustrating. And that would kind of echo a lot of things that they've said in the past. But I think it's also a very fair statement to say that, we're not going to spend a team hints to get anything for this team that's, a 500 team.
Yeah. That's it's one of those, even the way that you put it makes a lot of sense, because it's a situation to where you're like, well, the big moves that we made aren't aren't I don't want to say it like this, aren't living up to the billing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What else do we do? Type situation, and that's tough. I mean, it's honestly tough to swallow right now. But I felt like this last year too, and I feel like more often than not this is correct. The second best record to Philadelphia is since May.
Mm-hmm.
And they feel like they're a decent team. They feel like they're a heck of a lot better than they were last year. They feel like they've got the pieces on the pieces in the rotation that's going to stop losing streaks. They're going to be there in July. I'm not saying they should go out and do something, but it's also a clubhouse that's probably one of those that deserves a move at some point.
Yeah.
Whether that happens or not, I don't know. But I think that you make a good point of they're not going to make a move just to make a move, which at this point, with the teams not selling or anything like that, that's what it would feel like. but I hope that they can be creative to do something to spark some interest. And like you and I were talking about, even with the changeover in the Milwaukee front office, we feel like they're going to do something.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you got to keep up with the Joneses in this case if you want to get in.
Some degree. Now, and again, we like to use the cliche, "It's just like a trade," when somebody comes off the injured list or kind of mock that.
Yeah,
And that's fair, don't get me wrong. But I do think about the fact that you could have, Wilson Contreras added to this team. You could have Tommy Edman added to this team at some point in time, although, again, between the fact that, what Tommy Edman is even at his best and the fact he's had wrist surgery and the fact that he's been out all year long, I don't know what that looks
yeah,
like, right? But, it's still probably better than a Jose Fermin or maybe even a Brandon Crawford. We'll see. Um, but you're gonna have him. You could probably have Newt Bar at some point in time, hopefully soon. Even let's say All-Star break, right? Let's say those three guys are back at the All-Star break, and then we've seen some improvements out of Jordan Walker recently. He had a home run last night, had a big game last night in Memphis.
yeah.
If you're adding those three guys plus Jordan Walker, if you had those four guys to the team around the All-Star break, I mean, that changes the complexion of that team quite a bit. Now,
Sure.
make it better. How is that going to impact it? I don't know. Does that get the front office off the hook for making a trade? I wouldn't say so because they're looking for for the pitching more than anything. And you may get a Riley O'Brien to help in the bullpen. I think that's to the point of what Mo was saying is that health is going to dictate a lot of things because if they get all these pieces back, and in Tommy Edmonds' case, it's not even back because he hasn't ever been there. That changes the dynamic, or at least changes what you may want to acquire or what you're willing to give up if those pieces are doing what they can do. Now that's the kicker, right? I mean, you just don't know after people have been out so long how much production you're gonna get out of them. But on paper, those are some significant additions.
Sure. I mean, the closer you look to your opening day expectations, I mean, in the better, right? I
Right.
mean, that's and that I mean, yeah, I mean, it's I don't know. It's going to be interesting, and I want to see when some of those guys get back, and you hear that that do you see Arenado in the lineup this weekend?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would
I
expect
mean,
so.
I would be surprised if you don't.
Yeah.
New Bar progressing quickly, Edmund coming, Walker coming, and Contreras clearly coming. Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, you hit the nail on the head on all of those. It's um, it will be interesting. Like every deadline is, it's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah. But I think in a way that we look at this also is like you raise the floor of the team, right? Because you're gonna make roster moves for these guys. And that may, that sends Fermin back to Memphis. That maybe does make them make a decision on Brandon Crawford. It's gonna at least put Matt Carpenter back on the bench more than starting that he's been doing lately. I mean, just making these roster moves, you're going to get stronger in that regard too. So I think it's interesting, and again, the fact that the National League has helped the club out by being so mediocre, it's going to put them in that position where they could wait that out and see how it's going. Now, I know I was listening to Richard and Truman over at Playing Catch, and they've had, I think they're not talking about selling. I don't want to take that, but I think that there's an interesting point that they have put out also is that, and I think we've talked a little bit about this some, is this idea that they're gonna probably play just well enough to be buyers at this deadline instead of sellers and having a chance to maybe cash in a few assets and start setting up for the future because we've talked about there's not this is not a situation that is limited to this year, right? I mean, you look at next year and you wonder what that's going to look like. You have no Goldschmidt. The pitching staff isn't any better. I mean, half of it could be gone, unless they get creative in the free agent market. We may be sitting here this next year, kind of doing the same thing, struggling to get that wild card. Um, the 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 farm system needs a replenish, and if the Cardinals were struggling like they were doing last year, they were some assets, Helsley or Goldschmidt or whatever that might bring in those pieces. So I mean, are they gonna play just good enough to get out of the get into the buyer situation, but not well enough to be a playoff team, a real contender in the playoffs? Might be the worst case scenario, right?
Well, yeah, but here, let me put it to you this way.
Sure.
This is how I feel this will go. I understand where that's coming from. I completely get it. But the next tier of teams that they think is going to be good is here.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
Wynn, it's
Mhm.
Walker, it's Gorman, it's Burleson, it's Contreras, it's Scott when he's here, it's
Mhm.
Donovan. That's here. You know what I mean? Now it's a
Right.
point of, hey, let's hang around as long as we can and let's get these guys experience where we think we're really going to be good. So that's my issue is what do you move? I mean, do you move a
Mhm.
Goldschmidt? That's kind of where my point was a couple weeks ago. Is one, I'd love to see him finish as a Cardinal, but now they're going to have to figure out what to do with Walker and Burleson,
Mhm.
and that's the team. That's the team that's coming. I
Right.
think the interesting move is going to be the fact that you're probably going to be seeing less of Ivan Herrera at this point for seasoning in Memphis, and that the two catcher system may be Contreras and Page. And I understand where that's coming from, but I don't understand where you move because I feel like, and I think that it was kind of mapped out that this is the team they think that they're going to be soon. That's going to be really good, and none of those guys are going to be shipped out.
Well, no, no, and the problem is, at least in some point of view, is all the guys that you named there are not taking the ball every fifth day, right? I mean, you've got Sonny
Well, no, no,
Gray.
no. Yeah, but that's
You know,
that's
I'm
the
not.
thing. I mean, that's going to be. I mean, have we failed? Have we forgotten to trust the development of Cardinals pitching at this point? I mean, I don't mean that. I'm not being facetious
Sure,
in
sure,
any way at
no,
all. I'm just
no,
saying. I mean, that's because isn't that the one thing that we trusted in if they could develop anything else?
we did, but I don't know that we do as much now, because I just don't. I don't know. I mean, we have seen these guys, like I said, in Memphis. We almost said it. Nobody at Memphis has grabbed on
Sure,
that fifth
sure.
starter spot. Well, next year you've got Michaelis. You probably at this rate you're probably going to pick up the option on Gibson. Although then that puts a lot of risk too, just being older. You're probably not picking up the option on Lynn. Um, you've got Mats around, but what does that mean? We don't,
Yeah.
you can't count on that. So you're looking at filling 2 or 3 spots in the rotation anyway. And I don't think they have the pieces to do that here. And whether they're going to pay for that is a different story. Um, so I mean, I think that's the only option. If you could make some sort of trade that brought in a top pitching prospect, I think that's the only
Well,
kind of trade you would
that's
want to be
yes.
making.
Now
But
that I agree with. I mean
but
that's
yeah, can you do that? I mean, because
yeah.
we saw that last year, right? I mean, what would you have to get? You'd have to give. You'd have to do. I guess the only person on this team that would be able to maybe bring something back like that is Helsley. That you're actually
It,
possibly could trade.
yes.
And again,
And
if you're trading him, then you're writing off the season.
what is that the truth though? I mean, I'm not. I was just getting ready to throw that out to you.
Okay.
Is that a situation to where I would not be blown away is if they were still where they are right now in a playoff spot in the wild card and toiling into the division, if you still see Helsley traded for several reasons, because I'm not convinced that they're gonna they did it this year to where they're like, hey, we want everybody to have their roles.
Mhm.
I think that even the NL saves leader, I think is one of those things that I feel like they could probably. It would not shock me to see him traded, even if the situation are as it is right now. Let's put it that way, because I do think that you could get a sizable return on it, and it may not be a return to necessarily help the team this year. But if you feel like you could, if Baltimore comes to you and says that's our weak link, and with everything they have, I think you make the deal.
I'm not going to disagree with that on paper, and especially not. Yeah, I mean, if Baltimore's coming with somebody, then sure. Although, again, I mean, and I'm sure they do, but I think most of the prospects I know out of Baltimore are position players again, which granted, you still won. I mean, they're still great players. But then you start figuring out how they're going to play. But anyway, put that aside. I think that there is a case on paper for trading Helsley, even while you're staying in the division. But I just don't know. I mean, one, I don't think this front office is going to do that kind of thing. Two, I think even if they thought about that kind of thing, they look at Milwaukee 2 years ago or 3 years ago when they traded Hader in the middle of things and how that impacted the clubhouse, because that's just something they would think about. And three, I'm not 100% sure who takes that spot. I mean, Jojo Romero probably is the one you slept there, because we've seen some struggles out of Kittredge as of late. The bullpen has got pieces, but if you're gonna say this is a playoff team, you've got to have that guy at the back of the bullpen, right? I mean, and Romero might be your best option if you lost Helsley, but going into a playoff game, or ironically, we're talking some of the last playoff games that they played with Helsley Blue, but still, I think you go into that with Helsley as your closer, you at least feel confident that something's going to get locked down. Um, and go back to the Whitey. The manager's only as smart as his bullpen. And I think that I just don't see them making that kind of gamble. I think there's a
What?
case for it, but I
Yeah,
just don't think this front office is going to be one that's going to take that risk.
sure. What if Gallegos comes back and he's Gallegos?
I think there's a better chance of me winning the lottery I don't play. But if that came the case, I mean, maybe, because he's definitely got experience and stuff like that. But it's been a long time since Gallegos has been that lockdown guy. I
Sure.
mean, and
He's never
his
really truly been. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
He's in the
yeah.
closer type anyway. But I don't know. Something tells me that may be the play for them.
And I know it hurt for you because I know how much you're a healthy guy.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
you
I
say
mean,
that,
but
but
you know,
I don't know. I mean, I think if they do that, I would probably lay that on Heimblum. His influence, if nothing else, because I just don't think that's a Mo move. I don't know that Mo does. I don't think Mo does buy and sell for the most part, anyway. I mean, and he hasn't been in a position where he's had to very often. Um, but I think it's a tough thing to tell that clubhouse. Look, you're fighting for your lives, and we've just taken this piece away. I mean, even if you're adding another piece, um, I have problems believing that they would do that. I think there's a strong case for it. I understand the logical aspect of it, and maybe you could do it, but I don't think, knowing this organization and the impact that might have on the clubhouse, I would be surprised.
yeah.
Um, so I guess the biggest thing, we're getting closer to the draft, and I'm no draft expert at all, and you're much more in tune to the college game than I am. We're still a couple weeks out. We've seen some mock drafts. We'll see many more over the next couple of weeks. But what are you seeing the Cardinals are taking, and where do you think they should go?
Well, the ESPN mock that was done this week, where the Cardinals passed on Hagen Smith, blew me away a little bit.
Yeah.
I was like, nah, I don't know about that. And one, I'm not. Well, yeah, the draft is so hard to determine because it's we talked about this all the time. It's not like other sports because of the slot money and in
Mhm.
those things. That's one that for a shortstop who honestly, if he's drafted as a shortstop, but it could be projectable anywhere. It could be the center fielder of the future. You never
Right.
know.
Right.
That kind of surprised me when I saw that, and honestly, for them to pass, if they were to pass on Smith, it would make me wonder if there was something bigger going on. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? If they thought that Hagen is showing the signs that could potentially be an injury risk or something like that, but he did not show that in college. Let's put it that way. And yet he didn't. Well, you didn't go down on a Friday night, right?
No, I was in middle week game.
Okay, cool. I would have been surprised about that. There's some big arms coming out of college,
Mm.
and that's I would like for that to happen to see if they could maybe push that through. Quickly. I would be surprised if they took a position player. I mean, it's especially early, but also that I'm also one of those take the best available and figuring it out from there.
Yeah, I think that's always the good case, that you take. You never draft for need, especially early on,
Yeah,
because now I say that, um, that used to be the philosophy, but with players moving as fast as they are now, it's a little. I mean, you can let need impact you a little bit,
agreed.
right?
That's exactly where I was going to go after your point. I agree
Yeah,
with. I can 100% agree with you.
because it's not that it's like, oh, your need is now, but this guy's not going to be there for 3 or 4 years. There are players that will. I was reading that draft from The Athletic, I think, and they were talking about the Angels looking for a player that can make an impact in August or that could make a debut in August. And there are players like that, right? That can go basically straight to the major leagues after college or whatever the case may be. There are not a lot of them, but you're also probably looking at if you're where the Cardinals are drafting, at 7, it's almost if that guy's not in the majors in 2 years, it's almost a failure, right? I mean, it shouldn't be, but I think that's the expectation that people
Yeah,
put on draft picks like that is
sure.
if they're not there if they're not almost knocking on the door in 2026 and hopefully sooner to some
What?
people, then what are we doing here?
Yeah, I know. I feel like this is a good example how quickly we've forgotten about Graceffo.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? One of those things to where you're just like, oh crap. Now I was glad to hear that his name was brought up when Mo was talking the other day, and he brought up 4 or 5 of the names that you want to hear quite a bit. And I was like, okay, good. I mean, because it's just kind of off the radar thing, but selfishly, it's probably the fact that it's that you know, even as baseball fans, and we know that this isn't the game, we also want that uh, immediate impact, which unfortunately just doesn't exist in baseball that often.
Yeah. Yeah. But I wonder, if the Cardinals, because the Cardinals obviously need high level pitching. We've talked about it quite a bit. If you add a Burns or a Smith this time around, those guys are, like I said, they're not going to be there this year. But I mean, I think it's almost where you almost expect them at some point next year, right? I mean, maybe we're getting a little bit biased because of Skeens, but I don't know how much development they have left to do. I mean, maybe there is some, but that's the kind of thing the Cardinals don't have. Even if they're not ready for next year, they just don't have that guy that's coming, besides Tink Hintz. And so I mean, I'm like you. I'd be a little bit surprised if either one of those arms are available and they passed on them.
Yeah,
That said, I've seen the monographs that have like Bryce Rainier, um, and that sounds like an intriguing talent. And getting intriguing talents is a good thing. I mean, I think that Flores has got a little bit of a dilemma. I mean, it's one of those good problems to have, but there's going to be a lot of quality players at 7 still available, and you got to determine which one do you want, what do you want this future of this team to look like, because you're hopefully not going to have a draft pick like this again for quite some time.
yeah, oh yeah. That's the one luck of this, and I mean, and this is gonna sound completely absurd, but I want to say it. I mean, isn't this a job interview right now for? Isn't this a job interview right now as well?
For Flores
Yeah,
for which job? Because I think it is. Maybe for 2 jobs, for the one he's got and the one that he might want.
yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're just like, man, this is a big draft period and one that they don't fall into very often.
No.
So it's
I
pretty
mean,
crazy.
yeah, I mean, we've seen a little bit out of Chase Davis recently. So, there's still drafts to be developed and still to be evaluated. and there's no doubt that 2020's draft. I mean, we've talked about it a lot. We saw Ian Bedell get moved up to Memphis this week. There's still a chance for him to make a debut, and pretty much everybody that was drafted in 2020 would be a major leaguer, which would be amazing. But you know, I don't. I mean, I don't. I have no idea how the organization values what he's been doing and everything like that. But when you look at, I thought it was interesting. Like Mo said, we have to hit on this, and it is true. I mean, I think that you take that in a vacuum. I don't know that that was a, you know, an implication that there was if he didn't hit that we would need a new scouting director or whatever. But yeah, I think that this is intense. But there's also, there was as of a couple of years ago, Flores was one of the people that was heavily expected to take Mo's job when Mo left. And I don't know if that's still the case. It does feel like, they're looking at maybe like Heimblum because of the outside influence and try to shake things up a little bit. But if they're going to look internally, if he wants to put his case up there against Gersh or anybody else, having a good draft this year would really help.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think that you and I are both in agreement that this just seems very transitional.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. And I feel like the leader in the clubhouse of anybody that's in the front office. I think that's who it is. You know what I mean? It's not Gersh, because the draft says it all. And from all accounts, he's killed them. You know what I mean? One of those things. So yeah, I don't know. I agree. I've thought about that the whole time, and I was like, I know this sounds pretty easy, and the mind's probably pretty made up if they're going to stay in house and all those things. And like I said, I'm not necessarily certain they're going to either. Yeah. But Flores makes a lot of sense.
It does. I mean, then there's also that idea of he can do that well. Can he do everything else well? Right. I mean, how many times has Flores, negotiated with other teams or anything like that? Now, I think that whole front office kind of cross trains or something of that nature. I'm sure everybody's involved with some of this stuff, but just because you're good at one place doesn't mean you'd be great at the other place. That being said, I think you're right. I think he has been a strong internal candidate for quite some time. And I don't, I think I have a feeling that Gersh is more valued inside the organization than outside.
Agreed.
But there's also that sometimes you just need the guy that's going to, put his head down and do the job and not necessarily have to be the guy that's, out there all the time. I'm not saying that Gersh wouldn't do a fine job. I don't know he wouldn't, but he also may be very well suited for the job that he has. I more and more I think that I really think that the Cardinals, as much as they value continuity, the fact that the last few years have not been that great and that we've come, fan expectation has gone from 93 wins and a deep playoff run to 83 wins, and hopefully we get there as a wild card. I think they're going to take this opportunity to shake things up a little bit and bring in a voice or two that, if Heimblum he does get the job, or they may, like I said, they may interview people from completely outside the organization, although that would be a little bit out of character. They still might do that. But whoever it is, if it's Heimblum or if it's somebody outside the organization, they're going to bring in some new voices,
sure.
Right? Even if they're not replacing Gersh or Flores, they're going to bring in some new voices, and that could be a good thing for the Cardinals.
No, I completely agree. Yeah, that's how I feel about that. Feel about it as well. I mean, just makes too much sense at this point, because I think there's a lot of stale thought, not necessarily bad thought, but stale thought throughout baseball, and I think that everybody's trying to gain that edge because honestly, like you and I had talked about, we've talked about this for years, that the groupthink aspect is grounding a lot of teams, and I think the Cardinals may be in the middle of that.
Yeah.
You've called for an outside voice for 5 years, probably.
Yeah, I wrote that piece about them being insular. It's been 3 or 4 years. It was, and it was the whole thing, right? It wasn't even just the front office. Back when I was writing it, it was also, when Shannon left the radio booth, they just went straight to Horton, and when Danny Mac left and they wound up with Chip Carey, which somebody that they were had connections to, even though he wasn't quite the same. He was still a bit more outside. And I wrote it before that, but they've just, even in places like that, they tend to stick to, they get the former players, or they get people that have been with the organization, and it's been a long time. And I said that the hiring of Heimblum, even as just an advisor, um, is a step in the right direction, and an indication that they realize that they need some shaking up.
Sure.
Yep. So
Sure. Now, yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's, there's an, coming out of the fog of last year, there's a lot of excitement surrounding the organization to me.
Yep.
I felt like this was the most candid and optimistic that Mo has been, which kind of tells me that we may not, I hope we see him next year. And I do think he'll be with the organization, but I don't know. I get the feeling that he enjoys doing that.
Yeah.
And I think that we'll probably see him, but I do think as far as the day-to-day ops, we may see somebody else play a pivotal role next year.
Yeah, I think we talked about it last week here but Jeff Jones pointed out that he would be, if that Florida lab's really going to get kicked off next year, having somebody on the ground that can really supervise it, who's had a impact, has made that a goal for some time, may make sense. So Mo may be part of the organization down in Florida instead of in St. Louis, and who knows? I mean, there's no telling. And he may want to get completely out of the way from baseball too. I don't know. But I think it's, I don't know. This is a big year. This is, and whether he'll be back this year's big, next year's big, depending on when the transition really starts. But, yeah, I think it's interesting, but they got to hopefully get through this season first, and hopefully have at least some October to go with
Yeah.
it. But a lot of things going on, and a lot of things that'll be busy over the next couple of weeks. Anything else from this week? Again, you had the Marlin series that it just didn't need. I did, 2 extra inning games and then a walk off in the ninth.
Yeah.
They played the Marlins way too close for the fact that the Marlins are as bad as they are. You had the Cubs series, which was good, but the Cardinals scored 6 runs in that
Yeah.
series and happened to win. Um, you know, they're good things. Last night was great. But I don't know. Is there anything else from last week that you wanted to talk about before we wrap?
No, it's the same situation. It's one of those to where they've closed the gap, so to speak, from last year, to where nothing ever seemed to be clicking at the same time. To
Mhm.
where this year they have these ups and downs with the offense, which, to me, I mean, I hate to put it all on the shoulders, but it's a situation of where the stars need to hit,
Yeah.
and if you're confident that's going to happen, then they're going to be a pretty good team. I like the fact that you're seeing a new Burleson, that you see Donovan's really getting hot, and win with 2 strikes is amazing. I think those are things that are gonna keep them going, but they're stranding a lot of runners still yet, and that's what worries me about some of these 1-run games. Is the dam can break really easy on those, and that's
Yeah.
kind of what we were talking about earlier. To where, hey, you're going to be battle tested and be really good, or you're going to start losing a lot of these, and um, and you can tank pretty easy if things don't start breaking your way. So I hope that they can find some middle ground on that. I wish somebody at the plate could just catch a heater for a little while, and really carry him. I would love it. I mean, if it was one of the big 2, I think that you feel pretty darn good about things going forward. And then,
Yeah.
that deadline move is made to get you over the threshold, not just to fill a gap.
Yeah.
And then that would be exciting compared to where it was last year. And
Yeah.
you get the high draft pick, and things get pretty interesting at that point. That's my take on it. I mean, it was one of those to where, coming off the momentum of Chicago, you felt like just going in winning the series at Miami, it would be enough. I
Mhm.
personally expected them to get beat last night with the Willie Mays
Oh yeah.
news.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
there,
Yeah.
I was like, I don't think the Cardinals win it.
Yeah.
So, maybe one of those to where the small victory aspect of it, to walk away from a win, the day off, and then you have the Giants too at home over the weekend. You feel pretty good about it. Um, next week will be interesting. With am I mistaken? Is Pittsburgh in town?
No, they have the Braves starting
Braves in
Monday,
town. Yeah, I knew it
and
was
then the
somebody good.
Reds.
Yeah, it's Braves and Reds, and then you know, you go 4th of July, go to Washington over the break, and I think you can put together a pretty good run. Just like I say though, win the series, make it out. Now you just got to win one this weekend to feel pretty good about yourself, and then see what Atlanta comes in. And Atlanta offense has not been great. So it could be a situation where you can total up some wins here and play well. But yeah, I mean it's tough to overlook the frustration of losing the series in Miami.
Yeah, Cardinals have played 5 straight one-run games, and 7 of their last 10 have been one-run games, um, which is frustrating. I mean, and that's I think the most frustrating thing about the Marlins series to me, and I was afraid it was going to happen again last night, is if they can put up, they put up 7 in the first game, 8 in the second game. And 7 took them to the extra innings. 8, they lost. And last night they put up 6 and almost, felt like that. They cannot afford to lose games that they put up 6 runs, right? I mean, they just can't, because they don't happen that often. And so I think that was the most frustrating thing about that Marlins series, especially, was that they, the offense kind of showed up a little bit, and then the pitching let them down. So yeah, I agree. I think this is an interesting week. I wrote it at the Substack. Yeah, I don't remember. I think it was after the Rocky series. I was looking as like, yeah, they've got a whole lot of under 500 teams coming up, but the Cardinals are a under 500 team. We think that they're going to make hay on this, and they're really playing a lot of teams that are at their level, at least when you look at it record wise. And they won the 2 series. They were able to come back and win the series against Pirates, win the series against the Cubs. Got a chance to win this one. So if they can do that, if they can win 2 of 3, it's it's not fancy, but it gets the job done. The problem is when you're winning 2 of 3, when then go and lose a series like 2-1, it kind of wipes out all the good that you've done.
Sure.
You know,
So you gotta find a sweep in there somewhere. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
and I don't they don't have one this year, do they? Well, except for
Mm,
the Baltimore series, the Baltimore series.
yeah, I was gonna say
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's the only one. And to be fair, I don't think they've been the Brewers swept them early in the year, and the Brewers won 3 out of 4 then the next time around. There not been just a total lot of series that they've been swept in. I mean, just thinking about it, without going through the record, but I think that's something, right? I don't know if it's, I don't know that I don't know how much it's something, but it's something. And it may be just an indication of, that's where this team is. They're not bad, but they're not good. And so, they're just kind of going to bob around there in that middle. But you're right. I hope somebody can get on hot on the offensively, and, you've got get some good games out of the pitching staff, and, the Cardinals did go 12-3 earlier in the season, in May. I
Yeah.
mean, and it's hard for me to imagine them doing that again, but, you get some of these players back, and you get a little bit of optimism, and get on a run. If Nolan Gorman gets on one of his hot streaks, then, that can help a lot as well. But I think more than anything, I mean, the offense is going to be big, obviously, but if you can get good starts out of
Yeah.
if Michaelis could keep doing what he's doing, if Gibson keeps up, even if it's smoke and mirrors, and he gets some good starts out of Lance Lynn, then maybe that's when you can put something together.
Yeah.
Um, we'll see. We'll do all this talking, and then it'll come out tomorrow and lay an egg. Who knows? But there is chances of optimism, and if you can get to the All-Star break even 3 or 4 games over 500, which is a lot for this team, given that they've never been more than a game over. But if
Yeah.
you can get 3 or 4 over 500 at the All-Star break, then I think you like your chances, especially with the deadline coming right after it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I mean, and I feel like they're in a good spot, and I feel like talking to you on these. I feel like you feel like they're in a decent spot. It's I understand the trepidation with things that it's not always going to be. It's I don't know how to say this. I mean, I think Gray not pitching well for about 3 or 4 starts made things look a little bit glib. I think that his last start, to where he, visibly, decided that, hey, it's time to go, makes you feel a little bit better. I think Michaelis and Gibson, I think you're right. You're going to keep you in games. You can figure out the Lynn situation, and then 5 is going to be the one. I mean, Palante's done well though. That or adequate, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
I think you're just in such a better spot than you were last year, and
Well, yeah.
the optimism last year was one of those like, hey, surely this isn't who they are. Come on, this isn't it. Until you got around this point to realize that they're just terrible.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of pundits who still feel that way a little bit because the pieces just aren't there. But I mean, honestly, I mean, if you look through things, you realize they're not necessarily a great team. I don't know if there is necessarily one in the National League. I mean, there's Philadelphia who may be that, but you just, I feel like there's pieces in place that are going to be really good moving forward. And like I said, if your horses aren't going to be, if your stars aren't going to be your stars, you're just going to be who you are anyway.
Yeah.
And I just don't feel like that's how that's going to go all year. Arnaldo just doesn't really hit, or at least hard anyway, and that's troublesome. And then, I feel like they're in a good spot, and I feel like I just can't imagine both of them being like this all year.
I hope not. I feel to some degree, part of me feels like that you've seen players, even Hall of Fame players, that have a down year or two in the middle of their career, and then they get this kick at the end of the and have 3 or 4 more good years beforehand. And I'm kind of hoping that that's what we're seeing out of Nolan Arenado, right? That he's having a down year, and I know last year wasn't great, but at some point, he makes some adjustment and can get another couple of good years out of him. And who knows? I mean, it's been weird to see him be basically league average. So, but yeah, I think you get something out of those guys, you're in good shape. And I know we're running long here, but Stephen Matz had a setback this week with his back. Do you think we see him this year again? I mean, I know he's getting a second opinion. I haven't seen anything on it. I don't think that there's anything particular that says it is a season-ending thing, but it doesn't. I mean, a setback like that can't be great either.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about a guy that's had tough luck. You know what I'm saying? Throughout that contract situation, I'd love to see it, but I mean, could there be some benefit to possibly him being in the bullpen where he pitched so well last year? If he does come back, I mean, it's time may tell that may be the best path moving forward. So I don't know, but it's one of those to where, I mean, I wouldn't say Brett Cecil type, but this is not. I mean, he's been much more effective than that, but the injuries have been terrible.
Yeah, and he's had some real good spurts. Obviously, the end of last year was good. He's had some good time in the bullpen, so it's not a completely wasted contract, but it's not exactly going to go into most resume if you're looking at it. So, but yeah, I think honestly, I mean, it depends on this back situation and stuff like that. But you could easily see a situation where he comes back in August and it's a bullpen piece just because it's the easiest way to get him back to the major leagues, especially if they've made a trade and the rotation seems to be fairly stabilized.
Sure.
With the possibility of him being a long man or something like that. And then we'll see what they do for him for next year. I mean, that's a long way down the road. All right. Well, like I said, we run long, but hopefully, you're still with us. If not, I understand. Maybe you gave up at the at the break when Alan stopped talking. I don't know. That's possible. But anyway, we'll back at you next week. We'll talk about the Brave series and the rest of this Giants series, and I guess a couple of games of Reds probably too. But until then, for Alan, I'm Daniel. Good night.
Good night.
Say, hey, Willie, go get it. What do you mean, go get it? Man, that ball's way in left field. I don't care what field it's in. Willie plays all field. Every time we come to the game, you talking about Willie plays all the field. That's right. Let's call Willie and ask him. Call him. Okay, hey, Willie.
Yes.
Are you Willie Mays?
Yes.
Whose ball was that?
Why was it?
In left field.
Well, that's Irvin's ball.
I told you that. Every time we come to the game, we got to talk about it. The next time I'm going to sit in the grandstand.
Say, hey, fellas, what's your name?
Say who? Say Willie. Say hey. Say who? Swinging at the plate. Say hey. Say who? Say Willie. That giant kid is great. When he hits the ball, it's long gone man. Hits it farther than Campy can. Swings the bats like a little lead pipe. When they reach the ball, it's overripe. Say hey. Say who? Say Willie. Say hey. Say who? Swing it at the plate. Say hey. Say who? Say Willie. That giant kid is great. He runs the bases like a choo-choo train. Swings around second like an aeroplane. His cap flies off when he passes third. And he heads home like an eagle bird. Say hey. Say who? Say Willie. Say hey. Say who? Swinging at the plate. Say hey. Say who? Say Willie. That giant kid is great. Yes, he covers center like he had jet shoes. The other batters get the Willie blues. Anything hit his way is out. Man, it just don't pay those guys to clout. Say hey. Say who? Say Willie. Say hey. Say who? Swing it at the plate. Say hey. Say who? Say Willie. That giant kid is great. Willie served his Uncle Sam. He left the Giants in an awful jam. But now he's back, and he's Leo's joy. And Willie's still a growing boy. Say hey. Say who? Say Willie. Say hey. Say who? Swing it at the plate. Say hey. Say who? Say Willie. That giant kid is great. That giant kid is great. Say Willie. What you gonna say?
Say hey.